Note that this episode contains discussion of suicide that some people may find disturbing. Please take care of yourself. Across humanity, stories witness us, and through them we see, we hear, and we grow. I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Peter Rizzi, and this is Book Feels, a podcast about how books made us feel and how we feel about books. The Awakening was published in 1899 by Kate Chopin. Set in New Orleans in the late 1800s, it follows Edna Pontellier, the housewife of wealthy businessman Léonce. Edna has a cold relationship with her husband and a fraught one with her two young children. Throughout the book, first on Grand Isle, where the family vacations in the summer, and then in New Orleans, where the family lives, she makes connections with some interesting characters, including Mademoiselle Reiss, a talented and eccentric pianist, Adèle Ratignolle, a devoted housewife, Robert Lebrun, a friend who Edna eventually comes to love romantically, and Alcée Arobin, a fling with whom she has an extramarital affair. Because of and often in spite of such relationships, Edna slowly awakens to her own wants and desires, and eventually to an unshakable sense of herself. So, Pauline, when did you first encounter this landmark feminist novel?
I first read it, I think it was one of my brother's books. As per usual, I read it too young. But
I wonder why your brother had this book.
It was probably a high school book.
Yeah.
I feel like it's taught in a lot of high schools.
That's when I read it.
Yeah. So I read it first when I was in middle school, quite young, and I don't think it really penetrated my mind, like the themes, I mean. But when I read it again in high school and was really like forced to sit with it for a while and think through the themes, I think it was one of the first books that made me a feminist, to be honest. And you can see why in how radical the ideas are and how focused it is on the the living conditions of a normal woman at that time period.
I think same. I'm a feminist, and I remember reading this book in high school and it being pretty transformational for me too.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about it all throughout the podcast. It really stands the test of time. These themes and these stories, they still really resonated with us today when we went back and read it now.
Yeah, you and I have talked about how this book, when it came out, first was pretty heavily criticized for being overly sexual, for being immoral, and kind of fell out of anyone's, interest. It kind of was forgotten for a long time until it was rediscovered in the 60s or 70s, and now has become kind of a seminal work of fiction, and particularly feminist fiction.
And I think that kind of it being shunned originally, like you talked about, is yes, that it was sexual and immoral. It was a reflection of people's attitudes towards women at the time,
Yeah.
Where Edna awakening from kind of her life as a housewife and wanting more for herself was not okay in contemporary society at the time.
Yeah, and also in reading more about it, there were actually a lot of contemporaries, a lot of women at that time who did agree with her, who praised the book. But of course, only the male critics got the voice. And I think that's why, maybe it wasn't outright banned, but that's why it fell out of light for a while. And I just think it's amazing that it was so good and so pertinent that it came back.
Pauline, let's paint a picture for the environment surrounding our main character, Edna Pontellier.
Mm-hmm.
She is a 20-something-year-old woman, sort of like mid to late 20s. She's married to an older man named Léonce. They're set in the kind of Creole culture.
And she's not Creole.
She's not Creole.
She's
from Kentucky, but she's a transplant in this culture. And we're getting to know her, Léonce, and kind of some of the surrounding characters at their like summer resort. So they live in New Orleans during the year, but they kind of vacation during the summers at this place called Grand Isle. And one of the ways we're going to really start to understand Edna is through the eyes of her husband, Léonce. So,
who is such a jerk.
Léonce cares about appearances. He cares about having the happy housewife.
Right.
He is a, high earning businessman. He loves to earn money. He loves to spend money. At some point in the book, he tells Edna, the key to making money isn't saving money, it's earning more money. It's just like a constant chase.
Yeah, he's definitely kind of an ugly stereotype of what an American would be even today, but like certainly back in the day of like the late 1800s, early
What do
1900s,
they call that? Like the Gilded Age?
yeah, where the American dream was really in full swing.
Yeah.
I'd love to read a quote if that's all right.
Go for it.
The book opens with from Leonce's perspective, and he sees his wife coming back from the beach, and this is what he thinks about her. "You are burnt beyond recognition," he added, looking at his wife, as one looks at a valuable piece of personal property which has suffered some damage.
Right. So he's kind of like sitting in the shade, reading like the stock prices in the newspaper, smoking a cigar, like kind of doing his like
Mm-hmm.
manly man, earning the money type stuff. And his wife comes back from the beach and he says this, like, what do you feel when we read that passage, Pauline?
Ugh. So, I mean, I think that says enough. I think that, he's not somebody throughout the whole book. He doesn't ever ask Edna how she is. When we first meet him, he looks at her appearance and like immediately makes a comment on it and thinks of her as an object and thinks of her as like a valuable object that he owns that is like kind of meant to impress other people. And I find that frankly disgusting. Maybe it reminds me of some of the men I've known in my life and in my family in particular. But it just, yeah, he infuriates me.
I think your comment about the Americanness of this scene too is really on point. Even today, like you said, we see it.
Yeah.
This pursuit of wealth, of status. It happens all over the world, but it is a particularly American sort of
Yeah.
mindset.
Is it something that you're familiar with? Like, have you ever kind of had experience with that?
I have, similar to you, whether it was kind of family, extended family, just folks I was around growing up in school, etc. Yeah, just the pressure around like, what are you gonna do when you grow up?
Yeah. And how productive
How
are you?
productive are you?
Yeah.
It starts really early, and I mean, I can remember as like an 8-year-old thinking about what am I gonna do to like contribute to society as an
Yeah.
adult, right? Like it's ingrained in us so early.
Yeah, it's a really ugly side of America that I think people frame as rosy, and I think it's really really ahead of her time for the author to be writing a character like that and not celebrating him and actually painting him to be quite an ugly character.
Totally. And Edna's a bit of a foil to him because Edna is
Mhm.
at this point in the book just beginning to um, kind of dive into a more free-spirited way of life that isn't about status, that isn't about image.
Yeah, it's just kind of what she wants to do.
Exactly. And oh my gosh, everyone around her is like, Edna, what the hell are you doing? Like, this isn't
Mhm.
how um, a woman of your position acts, whether it's her husband, Leonce, even some of the other women and people who vacation at Grand Isle are
Yeah.
kind of perplexed by Edna.
Yeah, I think everyone is they don't know what to do with Edna because she um kind of just operates on her own level. She doesn't want to do things that she finds useless. Like there's this really great example of Edna not being in her house back in New Orleans, and she doesn't leave an excuse for her callers. And Leonce is very upset about that.
We've got to observe les convenances if we ever expect to get on and keep up with the procession. If you felt that you had to leave home this afternoon, you should have left some suitable explanation for your absence. So, Pauline, our resident French speaker, translate les convenances for us. What does that mean?
Well, actually, the book has some footnotes and it says conventions. And I do think it's a Creole usage of convenance. But it's not that different. It's the mores, the social mores, and what you're supposed to do to keep up appearances, which is just so like the idea of if you want to leave your house on a random Tuesday afternoon, like and you have to leave excuses in case you have callers is bonkers to me. Like it feels like you're literally a prisoner. Like you're just, well, okay, she's not literally a prisoner, but it feels like
You
she,
know, I mean, she's not literally, but I don't think it's a stretch. Like,
yeah,
we're just going to see so many ways in which she's so suppressed in this book.
yeah, and like she can't even go. She can't have a secret. She can't go anywhere without people knowing what she's up to.
Hmm.
And for her husband to do that, to cite social mores as the reason for that, I just think it's like, why? You know?
And for our listeners, when we were doing our kind of getting ready for this one, Pauline, I kind of made this comparison between Les Convenances, the conventions,
Hmm.
and when we did Catcher of the Rye, the like phoniness that Holden always alludes to in the world around him. Like
Right.
everyone's phony. And Edna's like, what are these conventions? What is the point? Like,
Yeah.
why am I living in this way? And in some ways they have a similar feeling about like the inability of the world to be good enough for them.
Yeah. I actually think that that's not a coincidence that this is from literature. That message is coming. 'Cause the message is coming from literature, because I think a lot of writers see holes in society and see like the weak points of our paradigms and shine the light on them. I think that's kind of the responsibility of a lot of writers. And in this particular case, the author is shining a light on like these useless social mores, and then also like we'll get to it, but also how women are treated as property, as Leonce does to Edna, and how they're sort of just treated as like decoration in a man's life
Mm.
versus like a full human being, which they fully are. Surprise, surprise.
Are there any ways that this sort of attitude about the way you're supposed to be shows up in your life? Can you think
Oh my
of
God.
ways that and it doesn't have to be related to womanhood, it can be related to
Yeah.
anything that yeah, the conventions feel stifling, the social
Yeah.
conventions?
Yeah. I think that honestly, being American can be really tough. Like I think that in the US, we have a kind of a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality, and also like a very overly positive mentality of never really showing weakness and always being okay. Like I
Mm.
remember when I said to when I was living in France and people asked me how I was doing, in French you say ça va, which means like how's it going? It's going. Like that's the response. And in English you always say like it's good, I'm good, and that
I'm doing well.
yeah, I'm doing well, like, when you're not necessarily, and I've had French friends when they weren't doing well, they would be honest and say, like, "I'm not doing that great." And in America, you just don't do that, and I feel like my whole life I've been raised to put on a type of mask, because people are uncomfortable with my emotions, and I think that Edna has to do that a lot too. Like she has wants and desires and she has feelings. And she's asked to be a society girl instead and kind of play nice with others, and keep a lot bottled up. And I certainly relate to that.
I feel you, and I think, yeah, again, it's funny how we keep coming back to the Americanness of this novel,
Hmm.
but it really rings true, like we we have to keep up those appearances in order to kind of have a career in this country
Right.
and to
Right.
like be okay. Like we don't have a strong social safety net. We don't have a lot of other
Yeah.
options for folks who need a break or
Hmm.
who aren't prepared to kind of live up to those social conventions that are required to network and find a job. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's exhausting.
It's really hard to find a place where you can be authentic. And maybe I'm speaking as an American who's lived in France. Like France also has a type of facade that you need to put up. I think all cultures do. And we can't speak to every country. So I can only provide an American perspective of how difficult it is, to be able to be myself and how exhausting it is, to constantly feel like I'm hiding myself. Yeah, which, we'll see Edna's reaction to that, and we'll discuss that.
Yeah, I think we want to talk about a moment that's a little bit later in the book that shows even more of Edna's resistance to the conventions, to Leonce.
Mhm.
And it's when Leonce is away for a long business trip to New York. And Edna decides she's going to move to the house next door.
Oh my god, Edna is such a rebel.
She's such a rebel. She sees that this house has gone up for rent or for sale or something. And she decides, I'm just going to go move into that one. You know, this house has all of Leonce's things,
Yeah.
all the things that I don't care about. I just want a small little house that I can live alone in to be myself. And, she's not really worried about what other people think. And
Yeah, she
she
isn't.
she jumps through the hoops to kind of make this happen.
She even throws a dinner party to celebrate her moving to what she calls the pigeon house because it's like a small house.
There's this quote, someone's asking her, "What does your husband say?" "I have not told him yet. I only thought of it this morning. He will think I am demented, no doubt. Perhaps you think so." So, just again, that, like,
Yeah.
everyone thinks that there's one right way for her to be, and it is to be the happy housewife, the happy
Mhm.
mom, and to hold up the conventions.
Yeah, and what is so interesting, again, thinking about how really Léonce and most people, but Léonce in particular in this part of the book, like, really only cares about appearances. He's not concerned about his wife who could actually be having a mental breakdown because I think that that is kind of erratic behavior. Like, I am kind of in awe and praising it because I do think it's amazing for someone to be such a rebel, but it's also incredibly irresponsible to, like, kinda leave your home and I don't know where you were raising your children, like, there's things that, like, maybe she should consider. She does it almost on a whim,
Yep,
and she isn't the most stable person, and we'll talk about that as well at some point,
yeah.
and Léonce doesn't care about that. He cares about how it looks. He thinks that if she's moving into a smaller house, his business associates will think that they can't afford to live in the bigger house, and so it'll hurt him and his business.
Yeah, so his response to Edna's letter informing him that she's gonna move to the house next door when he's away in New York is, "Okay, I've immediately hired an architect from downtown who can do major renovations to the main house, so no one will suspect a thing."
Yeah, he's just doing damage control when I'm just like while I was reading that, I was like, "Dude, talk to your wife."
No, they don't talk.
Like, that's true,
They don't
that's
talk.
true. It's hard like, I feel like Leonce is very one note in this book, like, he's not really given a ton of nuance. Um, and I'm having a hard time like, not demonizing him. I also think maybe I'm projecting a little bit because I've known so many controlling men, and people also just controlling people who really care about appearances and put appearances above,
Yeah.
like, someone's humanity and someone's well-being. Is that something that, I don't know, you've ever had experience with, or, like, what do you think about that?
What you said about, seeing Leonce as one-dimensional, I think the author writes him as very
Yeah,
one-dimensional. Um, I think we have to consider, what were his influences? Like,
yeah,
how did he get to be the way he is? And, like you said, America is this kind of rags to riches, pull yourself out by your bootstraps society. He is of the generation of people who are kind of becoming wealthy.
right,
Um, so, there is this sort of relentless pursuit of wealth,
yeah,
um, that can happen. And yeah, I think it does kind of become soul sucking. I mean,
mm,
I I think my dad's a bit of this generation
yeah,
where, um, his grandparents were immigrants. His parents' profession, his dad owned a grocery store. They lived in a two-bedroom house with 8 kids, so
yeah,
not a wealthy upbringing by any means. And my dad has worked really hard in his life to
mhm,
do well,
yeah, yeah,
to be successful, and I can see the way that that's had an impact.
mm,
I think when he talks to me about when he was young, he used to love creative writing. He used to do these, like, Shakespeare's in the park. Just
aw,
these parts of my dad's personality that I don't see as much anymore, that feel like in order to kind of abide by the conventions, be a good, normal American career
and also
person.
achieve the markers of success by
Yeah,
American
yeah.
standards. Yeah. Yeah, that American dream is toxic. Yeah, I mean, I can so relate to that as a child of immigrants and refugees, I think a lot of people admire my, especially the men in my family for coming to the US with nothing, literally nothing, and making a living for themselves and for their children, and I'm grateful for how much they were able to give me, even if they did cause harm, they were also able to give me a much better life than they had, but and I think to them, they have achieved certain markers of success, certain things that they would categorize as success, and it fits into the American dream. And yet they're unhappy people, and they've caused a lot of harm, and they continue to cause harm. And I think that we see that quite a bit in this book, actually, with a lot of people.
So we're talking about, yeah, Edna's behavior is a little all over the place, a little erratic. There should be some concern for her. But what really occurred to me through this reading was, yes, Edna's behavior is erratic. You
Mm.
know, a modern reading of her behavior might call her like bipolar.
Oh, why do you
Um,
think that?
she experiences both. She experiences these mood swings, she experiences these
Mm.
depressive episodes, but then these feelings where she's on top of the world and, like, no one can
Mm.
stop her. I mean, we
Yeah.
that is the literal writing, is like she feels that euphoria sometimes.
That's true. She goes really yeah, and even with her children, I think they talk about how she sometimes loves them and sometimes, like, can't be stand to be around them.
Oh, yeah, it's really up and down, and, uh, but I would think both of us would agree that our reading of this book, we wouldn't, like, wanna pathologize her,
Mm.
um, kind of behavior as, "Oh, well, she's bipolar." Like, we're just like, "This is normal." Like, look at how she's being treated, and for me, someone who's studying to be a counselor and who's going to be working really delicately with people on, like, how are they doing? Like, um, do you have, like, a mental diagnosis? Like,
Mm.
um it's so telling of, like, we wanna normalize so much more than we wanna pathologize, 'cause
Yeah.
you know, like I said, Edna's a modern reading might give her some sort of, like, mental disorder or some sort of mental illness, but we just see her as, like, how could she be any way other than she is in the environment she's in? And I think it's so telling for today, like, when folks are presenting with, whether it's mood swings, whether it's depression, whether it's, mania, what what is the why? Like,
Yeah.
and in what ways is this world not ready for them in the ways that the world Edna lived in was not ready for her,
Right.
that we don't quite see yet? And how can we get out of the pathology mindset and into the, this is a normal response to an abnormal situation that you are
Totally.
going through,
Yeah.
and really go there with people.
Yeah, and also maybe how to create a world that's more inclusive for somebody, um, who's going through something like that. I think that this is so unfortunate that this book is very similar to a lot of other, books written about women around the same time period and even after, about a woman who is, deemed hysterical. I think that was also just something that happened a lot in the 1800s, and earlier that, if a woman was acting out in different ways, she was deemed hysterical, she was drugged up, she was usually put on lithium of some kind. Honestly, it happens now in modern day as well. Um, and I think that you're right that it's not that I mean, maybe there's chemical imbalance perhaps, but also that the world didn't understand what those women actually needed, because the world wasn't built for them.
I have a quote.
Mhm.
There were days when she was very happy without knowing why. She was happy to be alive and breathing, when her whole being seemed to be one with the sunlight, the color, the odors, the luxuriant warmth of some perfect southern day. She liked then to wander alone into strange and unfamiliar places. She discovered many a sunny, sleepy corner fashioned to dream in, and she found it good to dream and to be alone and unmolested. There were days when she was unhappy. She did not know why. When it did not seem worthwhile to be glad or sorry, to be alive or dead. When life appeared to her like a grotesque pandemonium and humanity like worms struggling blindly toward inevitable annihilation. She could not work on such a day, nor weave fancies to stir her pulses and warm her blood.
Ouch. I wanna note that, like, the initial part of that passage where she's happy, it's in her solitude. And then when she's unhappy, it's in reflecting about the world she lives in where she's inevitably connected to humans. And I'm not encouraging I don't think humans are meant to be alone. Um, and I think that she also probably feels a lot of sorrow for being alone. And it just that quote is heartbreaking.
Yeah. And like you said, we see through to why this would be a normal response to
Mhm.
her environment. Um
Yeah, she has no one she can talk to as an equal,
yeah.
and nobody who understands her. Like, I think most people think she's a little quirky or odd at best, and other people think she's kind of dangerous. And I relate to that. So obviously, I don't live in the 1800s, and I'm very grateful for all the progress that's been made for women. But I think that there are in many ways I feel like I'm not made for this world, or this world isn't made for me. It feels like, you know, like we've talked about this. already a little bit, but it feels like our work environment isn't made for people who have trauma, for example. And you know, in the US where a culture of white supremacy reigns, it feels like it hasn't this society hasn't been made for someone like me who's a woman of color. And because of that, I get harmed pretty regularly without people even knowing, without people meaning to do it. Like there are very innocuous characters in this book who are perfectly nice, but who still kind of harm Edna.
You mentioned solitude
Hmm.
is where Edna finds her happiness. And I know you. I know solitude is where you've often found both happiness and loneliness, like you
Yeah.
said. And when you encounter those parts of the world that aren't for you and that make you feel smaller or that hurt you, um, you have things you retreat into that are just
Yeah.
for you.
Which a lot of them are books, which is why we're making this podcast. My first year in Boston, I was going through a lot. It was I was really in the throes of healing and recovery work for the things that have happened to me, and a lot of my life had to be unmade at that point, um, because it was built on falsehoods, like self falsehoods, and I had a realization maybe after the fact that I really did need to be alone because honestly, this world also isn't really meant for people who grieve. I think that particularly the US, but I think in general, people are very uncomfortable with public grieving. And I had a lot of grieving to do. And I couldn't really, there weren't people I could talk to about it. Because it's really painful, I think, for people to sit with your grief. So I retreated into books, and the books made me feel so seen and heard. And we're going to talk about some of those books, hopefully. We've already talked about a couple of them on this podcast, and yeah, and there is a lot of beauty and meaning in that, and in it, like through that, there is some sort of joy because you're finding yourself, you're finding your own like, you're finding authority over yourself, but there is so much sorrow because you're alone, and it's like a solitude that you really can't avoid. I know that you kind of had we both sort of had similar experiences our first year in Boston. Do you
Yeah,
wanna talk about that?
it was the same year, and similarly, uh, a lot of solitude,
Yeah,
uh, going through a breakup that felt huge, losing a really close friend, significant family difficulties, being
right.
pretty estranged from them at that time, and it almost feels like a fever dream when I look back on it.
Mhm,
Like I know that it happened. It was both so lonely and so necessary.
totally.
I really resonate with this idea of the dark night of the soul, which is where you have nowhere to go but inward. When you're doing spiritual recovery work, trying to cope with new
Mhm.
knowledge about what it means to be a human, what it means to be alive.
Yeah, and also trying to forge a new way of doing things.
Yes, yes, and I don't think either of us would be sitting in this room today the way we are without our big all the time we spent in solitude.
I know, and I think that, unfortunately, I don't think Edna ever really comes out of her dark night of the soul because I think society isn't wasn't made for that
Well,
for
there's no one
her at
for
that
her.
point. Yeah, there at that point in time, she couldn't have. Whereas I think we have the privilege of, obviously the world wasn't completely made for me, but I have the privilege of surviving it in a way that someone like Edna, and there are many women who were like her, she didn't have that privilege. And off mic, we were talking about how Kate Chopin or Kate Chopin, like however you want to pronounce it, how this book was banned and she probably caught a lot of grief for writing this book because it's a pretty scandalous book for the late 1800s. And
It's a woman doing her own thing, having
yeah.
affairs,
Yeah,
having
having
sex,
yeah, having
like
sexual being a sexual being,
yeah.
not really caring about children, which we'll talk about in a second. I just I don't know. I feel a lot of gratitude to the people who came before me because they really had to sacrifice themselves for to make a better world for me. And I think about how that makes me maybe not feel better, but like how in a way that I'm also being sacrificed. Maybe not to the extent that these women were, to make a better world. But hopefully that world comes sooner rather than later.
I hope so.
Yeah. So I think that going off of that, it's a good segue into just kind of the expectations that were thrust upon women for so long and that are still thrust on us. I think that one thing that Edna resists quite a lot is this concept of belonging to someone or belonging to anybody. Particularly, what struck me was her not really wanting to belong to her children, that like her life was not theirs, which I think that goes against a lot of the narrative, even modern day narratives of motherhood and how you sacrifice for your children. And there's this really great passage that I'd love to read. So this is her thinking about I don't know, kind of a really, I think, scandalous thought for that time and probably to this day, pretty scandalous. She had all her life long been accustomed to harbor thoughts and emotions which never voiced themselves. They had never taken the form of struggles. They belonged to her and were her own, and she entertained the conviction that she had a right to them and that they concerned no one but herself. Edna had once told Madame Ratignolle that she would never sacrifice herself for her children or for anyone. Then had followed a rather heated argument. The two women did not appear to understand each other or to be talking the same language. Edna tried to appease her friend and to explain, I would give up the unessential. I would give up my money, I would give my life for my children, but I wouldn't give myself. I can't make it more clear. It's only something which I am beginning to comprehend, which is revealing itself to me. I don't know what you would call the essential or what you mean by the unessential, said Madame Ratignolle cheerfully. But a woman who would give her life for her children could do no more than that. Your Bible tells you so. I'm sure I couldn't do more than that. Oh, yes, you could, laughed Edna. So I just think that's an incredible passage because this idea that, Edna would sacrifice her life for her children, but she won't give up the essential of herself. And like her essence and who she is and what she's for and what she's for is for herself. That's a really radical idea even today. And I think about how maybe Edna was somebody who might not have meant to she maybe wasn't meant to have children. She might have been somebody who was meant to be an artist or an intellectual and have a family in a different way, spread love in a different way, and contribute to the world differently than having children. And unfortunately, she's kind of a society girl. That was the expectation put on her.
And at the same time that Edna's exploring new ideas about motherhood, what it means to be a mother, she's thinking about romance.
Yeah, even though she's married.
Even though she's married. And I would say, even though we haven't talked about it yet, that this is probably the main plot line of the book is from the very beginning, there's this man, Robert Lebrun. I don't know how to say that in French accent.
Lebrun.
Okay. And Robert is I think he's 26-year-old son of the folks who are the managers of this resort that they go to in the summer. And Robert is known as this guy who basically spends every summer like identifying a new married woman to kind of like dote over and spend all his time with.
What is that?
I don't know what that is. We're not going to have time enough to do a Robert character study. But that's Robert's thing. And his woman of choice this summer is Edna. He's kind of right at her heels all summer long, ready to offer her a cool drink, ready to kind of fetch something for her, chat her up. And at the beginning of the story, Edna's like pretty ambivalent about it all.
Yeah.
She's just kind of doing her thing, like, oh, there's
he's
Robert.
Just like in her presence.
Yeah, he's there. And then quite quickly, around midway through the book, all of a sudden, Edna is in love and infatuated with Robert and can't stop thinking about him. And it starts when he discloses at the end of the summer that he's going to move to Mexico.
Yeah.
And
she's like devastated.
She's devastated.
Yeah.
It's not explicit, but the reason he's moving to Mexico is because he loves Edna and he knows that Edna is married and that he can't do that. And once she finds out he's leaving and that he's leaving like the next day, she's really devastated. She's floored.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then he eventually does come back towards the end of the book. And like they confess their love to each other in this very romantic scene. Like, when I'd read it when I was like, 13, 14, I thought was extremely romantic. Now reading it in my 30s is like, ooh, what's going on here? Do you want to read the passage, Peter?
Sure. So yeah, Robert comes back from Mexico. This is when Edna's back in New Orleans. The summer's over. And they have this sort of chance meeting where they finally disclose their love for one another. And Edna sort of asks him, and I'm just kind of skip around a few pages and read some passages from the book here about his love. Why have you been fighting against it? She asked. Why? Because you were not free. You were Leonce's wife. I couldn't help loving you if you were 10 times his wife, but so long as I went away from you and kept away, I could help telling you so. And then it goes on, he says, oh, I was demented, dreaming of wild, impossible things, recalling men who had set their wives free. We have heard such things. And finally they kiss. And as he's kind of disclosing his love and Edna's revealing hers, and then she says, you have been a very, very foolish boy, wasting your time dreaming of impossible things when you speak of Mr. Pontellier's setting me free. I'm no longer one of Mr. Pontellier's possessions to dispose of or not. I give myself where I choose. If he were to say, here, Robert, take her and be happy, she is yours, I should laugh at you both.
Ooh.
And Robert is so confused. His face grew a little white. What do you mean? He asked. And so this is just so funny because it wraps together everything we've been talking about, where Edna is so woke,
Yeah.
awakened to the fact that she's only her own. She doesn't belong to others. And the world does not understand that. The world is like, you are Leonce's wife or you are mine. There can be no both. There can be no either or. There can be no you are no ones. What do you mean? You are a woman.
Exactly. Like her lovers don't understand that she's not going to belong to them no matter what. No one can possess her anymore. And so like she can't even find refuge in her lovers. Even if she like loves Robert, he's never going to really grasp that she doesn't belong to him.
And she does love Robert.
Yeah,
she reveals
she does.
so. And at the same time, this whole awakening is so much more about herself.
Mm-hmm.
There's this other quote. It's a little bit later. It's actually she and Robert's this kind of chance meetup is interrupted because she needs to go pay a visit to Adele, Madame Ratignolle, who we talked about, Adele being one of her friends. And on her way back, she's hoping that Robert is still there waiting for her. And she said over and over to herself, today is Arobin, tomorrow it will be someone else. It makes no difference to me. It doesn't matter about Leonce. So she's basically saying Arobin is someone else who she'd actually had like a sort of fling with midway through the book in place of Robert because Robert was not available. She's kind of saying like, the man who it is, it does not matter.
No.
It's about my freedom and her being a sexual and romantic person.
Yeah. Her choosing who she gives her love to or her body to.
Yes.
And it doesn't like, the man doesn't matter. It's more like her choice that matters. And I think that's really lovely. And I think that's a really radical concept even for today. Like, again, this book continues to be like, unfortunately, so relevant.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people can benefit from reading it because I think that this concept of belonging to each other is still very au courant today. It's still like, it's still pretty normal today. Like, I think even I'm thinking of, Breakfast at Tiffany's is an old movie, but there's this, have you watched Breakfast at Tiffany's? There's this amazing scene at the end. Spoiler alert
That was a no. I shook my head.
a really old, a really old movie with Audrey Hepburn in it. But she's kind of a commitment phobic escort, high class escort, and the person who's in love with her is like, you belong to me. I belong to you. And she's like, people don't belong to each other. And he says something like, yes, they do. And it's very romantic. It's framed as quite romantic in the movie. It's a very famous scene of them kissing in the rain and like these trench coats in New York. And like, I love that movie. I'm not going to lie, even though it's like so problematic in so many ways. But I think that this idea is still very romantic to like belong to someone, to have someone belong to you when that's, I don't know. I think it's a radical and brave concept to think like I can choose to love somebody, but I don't belong to them.
And I think everyone is going to find their balance in romance of where that line is, right? How much of yourself do you give to someone else, and do you allow to kind of belong to someone else as part of the romantic love? But in the end, yeah, only you know yourself like you know yourself.
Yeah. Have you? I mean, I know we've talked about codependence before on this podcast, Peter, but like, I personally still struggle with that line of like, how much of myself, how much do I belong to another person? Yeah. Like, do you ever think about that?
I do all the time. Yeah, especially just dating, trying to meet people now, looking for a relationship. Because I've done so much work on myself, you've done so much work on yourself, and a lot of our work has been about differentiating and creating a sense of identity apart from a romantic partner, apart from the people around us. it's actually been a learning curve to sort of re-enter relationships
Right.
and have to learn, oh, a relationship is not just about kind of only focusing on myself. It is giving some of myself and
Yeah,
my
there's some
attention
integration.
to someone else.
Yeah.
And that like love can look like kind of negotiating like belonging to another person and creating that.
Mhm, mhm.
It was so revealing. Like the most recent feedback I've gotten in one of my relationships was like, I don't feel like you are attuned to me.
Mm.
And it was really helpful. It was hard to hear maybe at first,
Yeah.
but it was like, yeah, I have been so focused on not being codependent and on being
Yeah.
healthy in
You, like, swung the other
relationships that I
way.
swung the other way and was
Yeah.
like not attuned to someone I was dating.
Which is odd because you're so attuned to so many people, like, very naturally, and, like, I totally know what you mean because I do the exact same thing of, like, I think I naturally can read people very well. That's a part of me that I, like, actively try to turn off,
Right.
for when I'm in a romantic relationship, for their privacy as well, because I'm like, I should also let them come to me. If they want to communicate something, they should learn how to do it with me. But also, yeah, there's a line there, and sounds like we're both struggling with it. So yeah.
That someone might be like, "Wait, do you like me?" That we're not maybe showing interest or
Yeah,
showing that
yeah.
level of attunement. Yeah, it's hard work.
It can be, yeah,
And I think that's what's helpful for both of us is
mhm,
like we know that like everyone is learning how to be in relationships together and like
yeah.
we're, you
Yeah, and
know,
also it's very, individual and even individual to each couple. And I think that's something like, Edna unfortunately never really gets to learn. I think she's kind of stuck in the part of her that is awakening to like having a self and having a selfhood. And the world isn't ready for her to explore that. So she cannot really push forward into the next level of integration.
and maybe just to wrap up how this thing with Robert ends. So she's going home saying to herself, "Oh, I hope Robert is waiting for me." Um, and she arrives and finds a note that says, "Goodbye, because I love you." So Robert is so attached to both maybe good and bad things. Good being that, he doesn't want to have an affair with a married woman.
Yeah.
Bad being that he really can't see Edna's desire to not belong to someone.
Yeah, to not
Um,
necessarily be someone's wife, to
yes,
maybe be someone's lover for a while.
yes, and he's gone.
I think that, along that vein of thought, Edna really doesn't like she displays it several times that she doesn't belong to any lover, particularly because her first, extramarital encounter is not with Robert. It's not with someone she really loves. It's with Robin, Alcé Robin, for those Frenchies out there. This is a beautiful passage when he he doesn't exactly say that. It's kind of unclear exactly how much they do, but Alcé is this Lothario, this neighborhood Lothario in New Orleans, who has a habit of having affairs, and he seduces Edna, but she's also like pretty. She kind of just goes with it. I think she's curious about him. I think she's a sexual being, and he helps awaken her sexuality. And he spends a lot of time with her, especially since her husband's gone. On a business trip, and her children are also sent away for the summer to their grandmother. So she spends a lot of time with him, and he eventually kisses her, and it awakens something in her. But I think that what's important here is that it could have been any guy. It could have been Robert. It could have been Alcé. It could have been maybe not her husband, but it could have been anybody else because ultimately the vehicle doesn't matter. It was her own awakening that was inevitable. So I'll read this quote. Edna cried a little that night after Arobin left her. It was only one phase of the multitudinous emotions which had assailed her. There was with her an overwhelming feeling of irresponsibility. There was the shock of the unexpected and the unaccustomed. There was her husband's reproach looking at her from the external things around her, which he had provided for her external existence. There was Robert's reproach making itself felt by a quicker, fiercer, more overpowering love, which had awakened within her toward him. Above all, there was an understanding. She felt as if a mist had been lifted from her eyes, enabling her to look upon and comprehend the significance of life. That monster made up of beauty and brutality. But among the conflicting sensations which assailed her, there was neither shame nor remorse. There was a dull pang of regret because it was not the kiss of love which had inflamed her, because it was not love which had held this cup of life to her lips.
What a beautiful just work of art is that.
Damn.
That's a whole chapter of the book is just dedicated to that quote. And I mean, shout out to the author of just
Yeah, shout out
like
Kate.
encapsulating what it is to be a human so beautifully. What does it say? The balance of brutality and beauty.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. And I think the part that we most connect to in that is she's feeling all these things, right? She's had an affair. She's still thinking about the person whom she actually loves, Robert. She's worried about her husband's reproach. And at the end, she just feels a deep understanding of her what it is to be human,
To be alive.
to be alive.
Yeah, she's
There's no
finally
shame or
living.
remorse. She's just living.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something that, like, you and I've had to do a lot of work around that, like, it's hard as a human to hold multiple emotions at the same time, particularly conflicting emotions. Like, Edna here does talk about a lot of things that conflict with each other, her conflicting obligations, um, and kind of mixed feelings, towards, like, what had happened, but also this, like, extreme exhilaration.
And you know what I keep coming back to is thankfully we have each other and friends
Yeah.
who, when we're feeling so many things at once, can listen and can hold space for us. And Edna's people are not able to do that for her. And
Mhm.
things are going to end really tragically for Edna.
I know, which we'll talk about. I think that it's you saying that makes me so grateful for what we have and what I have. Like, I feel like whenever I've had strong emotions that conflict, they feel like they're taking over my whole body, and I do feel like I'm going crazy sometimes, and it takes a
Totally.
really good friend and a good support system and a good therapist to kind of tell you, "Oh, all those reactions are normal. Everybody goes through that. This is a very common response to what you're going through." Because it makes you understand that you're not a broken human, and I think that maybe what happens to Edna when she meets her demise is because she thinks she's a broken human.
Nobody is strong enough to do that self work entirely alone.
Yeah, no one can do it
And
alone.
that's why we said the solitude, the dark night of the soul, it needs to happen because that's when we get to gain some familiarity with those parts of ourselves, right?
Mhm.
With the different feelings, and don't just immediately distract
Yeah,
or go to someone else.
yeah.
Um, but to really thrive and to come out of that dark night of the soul alive
Mhm.
requires help.
Yeah. I'm really sad for Edna that she lived in a time where she couldn't have that, and a lot of people still feel that way, I think.
And it's completely tragic. Yeah.
Yeah.
After receiving Robert's note that he's not going to be with her, his goodbye note,
Mhm.
she goes back to Grand Isle and decides, I don't know what season it is, but it's not swimming season, to go for a swim. She tells Victor, who's another one of the brothers of Robert,
Yeah, who I think works there.
who works there,
Yeah.
that she's going for a swim, and he says something along the lines, "Oh, it's far too cold." But she said, "No, I'll be okay. I'm going to go." She goes out for a swim, and I don't even know where to go from here. I mean, her life kind of flashes before her eyes as she's swimming. She
Yeah.
feels her body giving. She just keeps swimming out deeper and deeper and deeper. She doesn't stop, and she kills herself. She drowns to death.
Yeah, it's incredibly sad, and I think it can feel abrupt to the person who's reading because Edna isn't acting like she's about to kill herself. Like, when she's talking to Victor, she's like, "Please prepare a room. I'd like a meal." Like she's kind of going through the motions of um a tourist, even though it's off season. And then she just walks into the water and doesn't look back.
And for me, this brings up so many things of note. Number one, we don't know when people are suicidal.
Yeah,
We simply don't. It often hides underneath the surface.
yeah,
But we do know that erratic behavior is a warning sign, right?
yeah.
That Edna may be at risk, and this may not have been common knowledge
Yeah.
a century plus ago when she lived.
Yeah, but I mean, certainly she displayed erratic behavior, and nobody really helped her. I mean, the doctor. There was a doctor who, said she could talk to him if she wanted, but her husband, her supposed like her closest friends, her loved ones, didn't reach out and help her.
No, didn't hold the space for her that she needed. And Pauline, you and I have both dealt with suicidal thoughts. It's a part of our
Yeah,
story, in kind of our our darkest moments, the
Yeah.
hardest times we went through when we were really
Mhm.
digging up so much of ourselves. And that way of thinking, it provides a way out when things are too big.
Yeah, when
When
something's too
when
painful.
something's too painful,
Yeah.
it's like this. There's a way out from this suffering, and we've both come a long way with
Yeah.
um, that sort of thinking. For myself, it's hard to read this passage.
Mhm.
I feel sensitive towards just the suffering, um,
Yeah.
the way her life ends, the tragedy.
Yeah, I remember when we were talking off mic about this book, you looked at me and you were like, "This couldn't have ended any other way," that she had no choice,
Hmm.
because the world just wasn't made for her. She was never going to be happy in this world that she grew up in. And again, I'm struck by how grateful I am that I am in a world, like, maybe not necessarily made for me completely, but like where I can have a meaningful existence and be happy and find joy. Um, my favorite drag queen, Trixie Mattel. Shout out Trixie if you're listening to this. Probably not. But she said something that I really loved. She said, I'm gonna, misquote her probably, but she said something to the effect of suicidal ideation is A, really common, B, um, you know, like not a big deal. And three, like C, like, like not a problem if you are able to, take care of it because there are so many tools now that we can look towards. But a lot of people just don't engage with those tools still to this day. Like people they shy away from therapy. They feel very ashamed of talking about their experience with suicidal ideation.
Caregivers and therapists are scared to bring it up. They still
Yeah.
think that, oh, if I mention suicide, I could put a thought in someone's head, which
Yeah.
is not, it cannot happen. That's not how
Yeah.
that works.
Yeah, if it's there, it's already there.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And I think both the comment I made to you during our lead up to this podcast that it couldn't have ended any other way, reflecting on, that this is a part of both of our stories.
Yeah.
I think we just have so much compassion for people who die by
Mhm.
suicide,
Yeah.
for people who think about suicide.
Yeah, I think that there used to be a kind of culture of blame around people, who died by suicide, like, that there was some sort of weakness in them, and I'd actually love to read a quote and think through it. So, in the middle of the book, Edna is talking to her crotchety late old lady friend who's single, and who was the one who played her music, and she is telling her friend that she wants to be an artist. So this is a quote where Edna is telling her lover about what her friend had told her. She says queer things sometimes in a bantering way that you don't notice at the time and you find yourself thinking about after. For instance, when I left her today, she put her arms around me and felt my shoulder blades to see if my wings were strong, she said. The bird that would soar above the level plane of tradition and prejudice must have strong wings. It is a sad spectacle to see the weaklings bruised, exhausted, fluttering back to earth. And at the end of the book, before Edna um, walks into the ocean and takes her life, she sees a bird with a broken wing. And I think, we could read that in a lot of different ways, but I definitely want to make sure it's not read as weakness. She's not a weak person. And I think that is an old narrative people use to comfort themselves about loved ones they've lost to suicide.
I think if I have any final takeaways about this book, the ending, it's just that Edna's not broken, that
Yeah.
she's normal, that
It's the world that's broken.
the world is broken. She's having a normal reaction to a really stifling, upsetting world and way of being treated. Um,
Yeah. She's denied a dignity that all humans have inherently.
and I think we all can find some place where we relate with Edna. Maybe some of us more strongly than others, but we certainly all had our ups and our downs.
Mm-hmm.
We've all gotten lost in a fantasy about another person.
Yeah.
Um,
We've all felt like we didn't belong
yes,
sometimes.
yes. And, sadly, some people that ends tragically with,
Yeah.
with, with suicide
Yeah, they
or
don't see a way out the
yeah.
way Edna did. Her only way out, and she feels there is this kind of um implication that she feels a lot of release and freedom. And
She's not scared.
Yeah.
They draw a parallel between an earlier swim she had in the book where she kind of learned to swim strongly for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
She goes a little bit further than she's ever gone before, and she feels fear. And this time, she feels a twinge of fear, and it just kind of leaves. She
Yeah.
feels like, okay.
Yeah. Which I think is it's such a tragic end. And again, I agree with you, Peter, that this book really couldn't have ended another way for this time period, for this type of person in her background. Um, and I think about the same for Holden. Like when we talked about Catcher in the Rye, that that also was kind of a bleak ending, and that he probably wasn't going to be okay.
Yeah.
And again, I'm just brought back to our own the privilege that we have that we're able to sit here and do a podcast on healing and feelings and
That would have been a good name too. Healing and
healings and
feelings.
feelings. Maybe a little on the nose. Um, and I don't know. I think that I'm very aware that there are people to this day in this day and age that don't have what we have. And again, I just want to send a lot of goodwill and warmth to those people and to all who suffer.
And we'll put a disclaimer at the beginning of the episode for sure. A really strong final message that even though her suicide is presented in an almost kind of freeing and
Mm-hmm.
releasing way, that suicide is a permanent solution to a short-term problem
Yeah.
that you know is not a viable solution.
Yeah, because if you think about it, I mean, obviously Edna's a fictional character, but like let's look at someone like Sylvia Plath or Virginia Woolf. They did have peers who they could have talked to.
Mhm.
They could have banded together and made a family of their own. Not that I'm not blaming them for trying to find a way out. It's a very understandable thing, but that there's never I don't know. I feel like it's important to keep hope because I think that there are people out there who will love you for who you are.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Should we end?
I guess
Anything
so.
else? Any final remarks?
I don't know, Peter. I think that I think I'm full of a lot of appreciation for, like I said, the women who came before me, who were able to give me these formative texts. Like I think that I am a better woman for it, and also someone who has become more compassionate in general to anyone who's been oppressed. Um, and I wish that I hope people take away the same message of let's, have some kindness and room for people maybe that we don't understand, who are behaving in ways that maybe frighten us, and try to understand the why.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on, and yeah, just a book remarkably before its time.
Seriously.
Oh my gosh. So really grateful for this story and stories like these.
Yeah. You can find Book Feels wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram at Bookfeels Podcast or email us at bookfeelspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.